Between the walls of a house that holds more than just memories lies a story that defies common sense. It's not about objects falling in the silence of the night or shadows glimpsed out of the corner of your eye. It's about family ties, open wounds, and secrets that insist on whispering through time. Sometimes the heaviest burden of a house isn't the roof over our heads, but what we carry in our hearts. Good evening, Dom. I'm writing to share something that has been on my mind. Talking about family isn't always easy, but sometimes it's necessary. I hope this story finds a place in your thoughts, and perhaps in the heart of whoever listens to it. My name is Ismail, and over half a century of life I've learned that family is like a mosaic. Each piece has its own shape and tone. Some fit together seamlessly, while others seem entirely out of place. In this mosaic, my niece Manuela has always been the piece no one knew where to place. At 30 years old, Manuela is the eldest daughter of my sister Ingrid. From a young age, she showed a strong-willed temperament, but that trait evolved into something more complicated. Her ambition was peculiar. She didn't seek personal achievements, but rather to point out others' flaws, claiming her life and family were flawless, unlike the rest of us, who, according to her, lived in permanent and irredeemable chaos. Family gatherings became the stage where Manuela shone. She would usually arrive late, ensuring her entrance was noticed. She always brought a dish she had prepared herself, not out of generosity, but to provoke comparisons with what others had brought. Any attempt to discuss topics that didn't please her was promptly interrupted, as Manuela redirected the conversation to talk about her daughter or husband, whom she treated like trophies she was eager to display. Carlos, her husband, was her complete opposite, a man with a calm demeanor, gentle words, and measured gestures. He never argued, never raised his voice, always meeting his wife's demands. The family often wondered whether his patience stemmed from resignation or genuine inner peace, because living with Manuela had to be, at the very least, exhausting. Their daughter, on the other hand, was an introspective child, perhaps too much for her age. I often saw her observing everything from a distance, with a gaze that seemed to understand more than she should for someone so young. Manuela couldn't tolerate dissenting opinions. For her, any disagreement felt like a personal attack. At a lunch at Ingrid's house, we were discussing preparations for her birthday. Almost everyone agreed on something simple in the backyard, everyone except Manuela. "Again in the backyard, Mom," she said, dropping her fork with a sharp clink. "We could rent a hall or go to a restaurant, something more elegant, don't you think?" Ingrid tried to smooth things over. "It's more practical here, daughter, and it saves money. Besides, everyone can help." "Sure, whatever you want." She crossed her arms. "If you prefer something boring, fine. Just don't complain later if no one shows up, or if it feels more like a wake than a party." Though clearly bothered, Ingrid maintained a firm tone. "It's a practical solution, as I said. We can't always splurge on unnecessary things." Before the argument escalated, Aunt Darlene intervened with an uncomfortable smile. "Sweetheart, sometimes it's not simplicity that ruins things, but a lack of respect. Perhaps you should learn that before speaking." The comment hit its mark. Manuela fell silent, visibly displeased, while Ingrid, tired, left the room and went to the backyard. The rest of us tried to continue the lunch, but the atmosphere had already become irreparably tense. Unfortunately, that wasn't the only time Manuela caused conflict. I could list countless occasions where her sharp words or need to always be right created family tensions. But of all the situations, the one that stood out the most was her dispute with my daughter Giulietta. Giulietta always held a special place in my father's heart. Since she was little, he saw in her the same kindness that marked my mother before she passed. So, it came as no surprise when the will revealed that the house in the municipality would go to her. However, this decision created a significant problem, as Manuela, my niece, was living in that house. The reaction was immediate. Manuela couldn't accept that my daughter would inherit something she believed was rightfully hers. "What do you mean this house is Giulietta's?" she asked indignantly upon hearing the news from Ingrid. "I've lived here for so long, and now they want to throw me out as if I meant nothing." "It was your grandfather's decision, Manuela," my sister explained, trying to soften the blow. "He always had immense affection for Giulietta. This isn't about you. It's about respecting his wishes." But no justification seemed to suffice. Respect his wishes? And who respects everything I've done for this family? This is a tremendous injustice. This house should be mine. When I heard about the conflict, I decided to speak to her directly. I went to the house intending to calm things down, but as soon as Manuela opened the door, her defensive stance was evident. "If you came here to evict me, you'd better not come in," she said, arms crossed. "I'm not here to fight," I responded calmly. "I just want you to understand that this was my father's decision. He always wanted the best for all of us, but this house was important to him and to Giulietta." "The best for all?" she retorted bitterly. "Except for me, of course. It's always like this, Ismael. In this family, I'm never valued. How do you expect me to stay silent while you take away what's mine?" "It's not yours, Manuela." I spoke firmly but kept my tone steady. "It never was. You lived here because my father allowed it, but the house never belonged to you." Her eyes gleamed with anger, and the tears that formed weren't of sadness, but indignation. "Of course, because to you I'm always the selfish one, right? But no one thinks about what I've been through. No one understands what it's like to constantly be in others' shadows." I realized that insisting was futile. I tried to make it clear that my father's decision should be respected, but as I left, I knew I had only fueled Manuela's resentment further. When I told my daughter about the disagreement, her response was disarming. "Dad, I don't want this to turn into a fight. If she needs the house, she can have it. It's not worth it." Giulietta had always been generous, avoiding conflicts even if it meant giving up something important. However, what truly bothered her wasn't giving up the house, but what followed. A cousin confided that Manuela, besides being upset, was bad-mouthing her. She described Giulietta as a spinster, insinuating no one took her seriously. In her words, "No man wants a bitter woman." As if that weren't enough, she claimed my daughter didn't deserve the house because she hadn't started a family. As if someone's worth depended on that. When Giulietta heard this, something inside her changed. The patience that had made her yield so many times gave way to a fury she could no longer contain. The next morning, without hesitation, she went to the house that was rightfully hers. Her voice, firm and determined, reflected the accumulated indignation. "I want you out. You have 24 hours to leave this house. My grandfather left it to me, and I'm tired of your insults and provocations." Manuela, visibly surprised, blinked a few times before regaining her composure. "What are you talking about? What insults? I only said the truth." "Oh, really?" Giulietta retorted, stepping closer. "Then you didn't say I'm a spinster and that no man takes me seriously. Do you think saying that makes you better than me? Because let me tell you, Manuela, your attitude only drives away anyone who tries to like you." Manuela's face turned red with anger, but she didn't back down. "I only said what everyone already thinks. If you can't handle it, that's not my problem." Giulietta took a deep breath before responding. "Well, know this, you have until tomorrow to leave. This house is mine, and if you don't leave, I'll seek legal help. I'm not going to let you take advantage of me and what my grandfather left me anymore." Giulietta had never sought conflicts. She always tried to keep the peace. But the situation had crossed the line, and after so many humiliations, she couldn't stay silent anymore. Her reaction was well received by the family. Some praised her, while others made sarcastic jokes about Manuela, saying Giulietta had inherited her grandfather's firm temperament. However, my daughter felt uncomfortable with all this attention. She didn't want to be the center of attention, let alone see the family use the episode to criticize her cousin. Naturally, this only deepened Manuela's resentment. To her, the family's support for Giulietta was further proof of betrayal. I'm certain that in her mind, my daughter hadn't just stolen the house, but had also used the situation to paint herself as the family's favorite. When Giulietta finally moved in, the comfort she expected didn't come. Many times she thought about giving the house back to her cousin. However, she knew Manuela would never accept such a gesture. She was too proud and would somehow make herself the victim again. In the weeks following the conflict, everything seemed to calm down. Manuela stopped attending family gatherings, distancing herself like a shadow no one mentioned. Life went on, and at least on the surface, everything seemed fine. But one morning when Giulietta visited me, I noticed something was wrong. We were sitting in the living room having coffee. She was speaking calmly when, out of nowhere, she made a comment that caught my attention. "Dad, I don't know if it's just in my head, but the house feels strange." There was hesitation in her voice, as if she didn't even believe what she was saying. "It's not that I don't like it there, it's just that some days I feel like the house is heavy, you know?" I set my cup down on the table, paying close attention to her words. Julieta never exaggerated, and that worried me. "Heavy how?" I asked, trying to understand. She sighed before answering. "It's hard to explain. Sometimes at night I wake up with the feeling I'm not alone, like there's someone else in the house with me, but I don't know, maybe it's just in my head. I guess I haven't gotten used to the place yet." I did my best to reassure her. "That's normal, sweetie. You're still adjusting. The house holds a lot of memories of your grandfather. Over time, it will feel more like you, more like your place." "I think so too, Dad, but I don't know. It's hard to explain. The house is fine, but I feel this weird emptiness, like something's out of place." Days passed until I got another call from her. It was at night, and her tone over the phone made it clear something was wrong. "Dad, I need to talk to you about something," she started hesitantly. "What happened, sweetie?" I asked, putting aside what I was doing to listen carefully. "Last night I dreamed about Grandpa. It was so strange. He didn't say anything. He just looked at me. But the way he looked at me was different than usual." I waited for her to continue. There was a heavy pause on the other end of the line. "He seemed angry, Dad. His expression, it wasn't how I remember him. He looked upset, I think. And what scared me the most was that he didn't have teeth. His mouth was open but completely empty, and he was making faces that made me uncomfortable." A chill ran down my spine as she described the dream. It was impossible not to picture what she was saying, even though it was something I would rather not visualize. "He just stared at me like he wanted to say something but couldn't. It felt like those faces were an attempt to communicate, but no sound came out." Her voice trembled as she continued. "Dad, it felt so real that I can't get it out of my head." "Assad, it might be stress from everything you've been through with the house, sweetie," I suggested, trying to ease her mind. "Sometimes dreams are a way for our minds to process emotions." She sighed, but she sounded unsure. "I don't know. It didn't feel like just a dream. It was him, I'm sure. And he seemed disappointed in me." Her words shook me. My father had always adored her more than anyone in the family. The idea that he might be angry with her was hard to accept. "He loved you so much, Juju. Don't let this worry you. Why don't you light a candle and say a prayer for him?" Small gestures like that help more than we realize. It took me a few days to find the time to visit her, but what she had said kept playing in my mind. When I arrived at her house, she greeted me with a faint smile, but there was something in her eyes, as if she were distant. "Hi, Dad. It's good to see you. What brings you here?" "I wanted to check on how you're feeling," I said as I stepped into the small entryway. She nodded and invited me inside. She went to the kitchen and I took the opportunity to look around. The place was tidy, but there was something odd in the air. It wasn't about the furniture, though it was clear some parts still needed decorating. It was a different kind of emptiness, something harder to describe. When she returned, I sat on the couch and let my gaze wander around the space. "Are you feeling more comfortable here?" I asked. She hesitated before answering, sitting across from me. "I think so, but it's still hard to feel at home, like the house isn't really mine. I don't know if it's because I'm still adjusting or because I can't stop thinking about everything that happened with Manuela." "That's normal, sweetie. Just like we adapt to houses, they also need to adjust to those who live in them. And this house has history, memories. Maybe that's what you're feeling." "Maybe," she replied, but doubt lingered in her voice. "You know, sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night and it feels like something's off. Not that anything happens, but it feels like something's out of place." I looked around. The soft morning light filled the room, making the space feel inviting, but her words left a weight in the air. "Has anything specific happened?" I asked, trying to keep a casual tone. "No, I don't think so." She shrugged. "Maybe it's just in my head. The house is in order, but I still don't feel like I belong here." I stayed quiet, thinking. The feeling she described was something I didn't know how to resolve, but I understood. Give it time. I placed a hand on her shoulder. Both people and houses need time to get used to each other. The conversation seemed settled until the knocking on the door woke me up in the middle of the night. It was rapid, almost desperate. I got up immediately, still trying to make sense of what was happening. When I opened the door, there was Giulietta, her face pale and her eyes red from crying. Her body trembled as if the cold had seeped into her bones. "Dad," she murmured, almost voiceless, breathing irregularly. I couldn't stay there. I had to come here. Without hesitation, I let her in. I closed the door and guided her to the living room. She collapsed onto the couch, hugging herself as she tried to stop shaking. I sat across from her, uneasy. "What happened, sweetie?" I asked, trying to hide my growing fear. She took a deep breath, but her words came out fragmented. "I saw him, Dad. I saw Grandpa. He was in the kitchen." A chill ran down my spine, but I stayed silent, letting her continue. My father had been gone for months, so it was impossible. Yet the seriousness in her expression left no doubt that she believed what she had seen. I woke up thirsty and went to the kitchen to get some water. When I turned on the light, he was there, standing, facing the stove. I recognized his posture instantly, but there was something strange. He was hunched over as if carrying something invisible. He didn't move, didn't say anything, but he looked so real, Dad. I was paralyzed. Tears streamed down her face as she went on, her voice breaking. I ran out of the kitchen and locked myself in the bedroom. I spent the rest of the night awake, trembling. "Dad, I feel like I'm going crazy. Since I moved in, I've started seeing things." She paused, taking a deep breath before continuing, even more distressed. "I see shadows. At first I thought they were reflections, tricks of my mind, but they're not. Sometimes I see something pass by the hallway while I'm on my computer, like someone's walking. Other times I feel like someone is watching me from the kitchen door, but when I look, there's no one there. I don't know what to do anymore. I'm not alone in that house, Dad." I wanted to hug her, to say something to calm her down, but I could feel the weight of what she was saying. It wasn't just her fear. It was mine too. The next morning, Giulietta seemed more serene. When I saw her, there was still a hint of exhaustion in her eyes, but her expression was calm. As soon as she saw me, she walked over and hugged me. "Dad, I'm sorry about last night." She took a deep breath. "I think I got carried away by my emotions. I'm really stressed with work, the house. I think it all just got mixed up. But I'm okay now, really." I watched her for a moment, trying to gauge if she really believed what she was saying or if she was just trying to convince herself. "Sweetie, I understand that you want to move forward, but I don't think this is something to ignore. How about we do something to help you feel more at peace? We could get some holy water and pray for the house." She looked at me with a mix of doubt and resignation, knowing I wouldn't let it go. "Okay, Dad. If it'll make you feel better, we can do it." That afternoon, I called Sandra, one of Giulietta's aunts, known in the family for her unwavering faith. Without going into too much detail, I asked for her help. Giulietta chose not to share everything, but Sandra, as always, was quick to offer her support. The next morning, she arrived early, carrying a rosary and a small bottle of holy water. "We'll pray for the whole house to make sure anything that shouldn't be here leaves," she said firmly as we entered. We gathered in the living room and began to pray the rosary. Sandra walked through the rooms, sprinkling holy water in every corner. Giulietta remained silent, hands clasped, eyes fixed on the floor, but sometimes she seemed lost in her own thoughts. When we finished, Sandra looked at my daughter seriously. "Juju, you know what I think? You should do a spiritual cleansing. Remember, Manuela used to live here and she didn't have good energy. Maybe something of hers is still stuck here." Giulietta frowned, clearly uncomfortable. "Aunt, I don't know if that makes much sense. Even if Manuela had, I don't know. Bad energy, that doesn't explain what's happening now." Sandra crossed her arms, resolute. "That's what you think, but sometimes these things linger and can mix with other energies. The important thing is to cleanse the house and yourself to find peace." Giulietta sighed, visibly frustrated and tired. "I don't know, Aunt. This cleansing stuff feels so strange to me. I'd rather not get involved in it." I stepped in before the conversation dragged on. The important thing is that you feel comfortable, sweetie. If you think the cleansing isn't necessary, that's fine. But the rosary and holy water already help make the atmosphere lighter." She reluctantly agreed as we said goodbye to Sandra. I noticed that while she seemed calm on the outside, Giulietta was still reflecting on everything. From here it's me, Giulietta, narrating what happened. I tried to move on with my life after that. When they prayed the rosary and sprinkled holy water, the house felt lighter. Maybe it was just in my head, but I felt like the atmosphere wasn't as heavy. So I decided to focus on work and my routine. I began ignoring the little things that still bothered me. If something strange happened, I told myself, it's just my imagination. My days went on as usual, or at least I wanted to believe they did. When I worked from home, I'd spend hours in front of my computer. To avoid the silence, I played music or videos in the background. I filled the space with sound, trying to make the environment feel more alive, but the nights remained challenging. In the silence, that unsettling feeling returned. It seemed like when I let my guard down, something in the air was waiting. One night I sat at the dining table to work. The plan was to stay up late because I needed to finish a project urgently. Before I knew it, it was almost 1 in the morning. The house was immersed in absolute silence, broken only by the constant tapping of my keyboard. Despite this, I felt an odd restlessness, an uncomfortable sensation that I wasn't alone. Then it happened. A sharp metallic noise echoed through the house, making me immediately lift my head. It sounded like metal objects clashing loudly, like cutlery falling in the kitchen. Instinctively, my eyes turned to the room where the sound seemed to come from, but I saw nothing unusual. The soft glow of the kitchen light only highlighted the still and empty space. Even so, I was sure the noise had been real, and worse, I had heard it more than once. I remained motionless, my fingers frozen over the keyboard, hoping the sound would repeat. But silence prevailed. I took a deep breath, trying to push the unease away and return to work. But the fear had already settled in, a suffocating presence that felt like it was squeezing my chest. The days passed, and I convinced myself it was all in my imagination. It was the easiest way to cope with what had happened. As a precaution, I avoided working late and started turning off the computer earlier. The nights became quiet again, though that persistent discomfort continued to linger. Before bed, I prayed fervently, hoping to fill the house with a sense of protection that might bring me some relief. One night, as I was drifting off to sleep, an excruciating pain hit me. It was a cramp so intense in my left leg, it felt like something was tearing my muscles apart. I writhed, trying to ease the pain with my hands, but nothing worked. The sensation was as if invisible blades were slicing my flesh. I tried to scream, but my voice seemed unable to pierce the emptiness of the room. And then I heard it. Laughter. It was low, subtle, almost a whisper, but unmistakable. The sound came from very close, on my right. My heart raced. I turned my head toward the sound, expecting to see something, but there was no one. The space beside me was completely empty. The dim light from the nightstand illuminated the room, revealing the same familiar scene. Even so, the laughter continued as if an invisible presence was beside me, delighting in my suffering. A cold shiver ran down my spine, starting at my nape and descending to my feet, as if icy hands were caressing my skin. I froze, every sense heightened, the quickened sound of my breathing, the sweat dripping from my forehead, my heart pounding in my chest. Suddenly, the laughter felt so close that I imagined a face leaning over mine, near enough to feel its warmth. "Stop!" I shouted, summoning every ounce of strength I had, but my voice came out trembling, barely audible. The sound ceased, and the pain began to fade gradually. I stayed in bed, trembling, tears streaming down my face. I looked around, but there was nothing, just the familiar emptiness of the room, now charged with a silent threat. I couldn't sleep for the rest of the night. I sat still, eyes fixed on the door, waiting for any sign that it might happen again. The next morning, I sprinkled holy water in every corner of the house. The act gave me a momentary sense of safety. Since then, I've repeated that ritual daily, trying to fend off the lingering dread. But nothing could have prepared me for what was to come. I decided to set aside an afternoon to clean the second floor. Even though I rarely used it, I didn't like letting dust accumulate, especially in Manuela's old room. That space always gave me an inexplicable discomfort, but I tried not to think about it too much. "It's just an empty room," I repeated to myself like a mantra. I went up with a bucket of clean water and a mop, determined to get it over with quickly. The room was exactly as it always was, an empty wardrobe and a window letting in the faint light of late afternoon. I began working silently, mopping the floor with mechanical movements. After a few minutes, I finished. I sighed in relief and grabbed the bucket. The water inside was dark, murky, reflecting the dim light from the window. I left the room with the bucket in hand, heading toward the stairs. The corridor in front of me was short, but at that moment, it felt much longer. A shiver ran down my nape, but I tried to ignore it, blaming it on fatigue. When I turned to go down the stairs, my heart stopped. There he was, standing at the top of the staircase, blocking my path. It was my grandfather, or something that looked like him. The figure was taller and thinner than I remembered, the skin dull, almost grey, with a lifeless sheen. His eyes were enormous, wide open, staring at me with an unsettling intensity. His mouth, agape, was a dark void, toothless, an endless chasm. I froze in place. The bucket slipped from my hands, crashing to the floor and spilling dirty water down the steps. The sound echoed through the house, making me step back slightly, but I still couldn't move. "Grandpa," I murmured, my voice barely a whisper. He didn't respond. He just stood there, motionless, like a grotesque wax figure. For a moment I thought he wouldn't move, but then slowly he lifted one leg. The movement was strange, awkward, as if his body struggled to obey. His foot touched the first step and his thin arms hung lifelessly at his sides. Suddenly, as if possessed by some inhuman energy, he began to move at a terrifying speed. In seconds, he was charging toward me with jerky, erratic movements. Before I could react, he was right in front of me and I was paralyzed. That thing threw itself on me, its icy arms wrapping around me in a grip that took my breath away. It felt like being suffocated by something lifeless, yet pulsing with a horrifying energy. The face was too close, and the rancid, heavy breath filled the space between us. Suddenly, I felt us falling. We tumbled down the stairs, my body dragged along with that thing. The impact was terrifying, but the worst part was the feeling of being pulled. Not just physically, but mentally, as if something inside me was being taken. When we finally stopped, I found myself sprawled on the floor, unable to move. I was soaked, the water from the bucket forming a puddle around me. My clothes clung to my skin, and my muscles trembled uncontrollably. Each breath was a struggle, as if my lungs were crushed. With effort, I opened my eyes. My vision was blurry, fogged by tears and fear. I looked around, searching for the thing that had attacked me. But there was nothing. No sound, no movement. Just the constant dripping of water from the overturned bucket echoing in the stifling silence of the house. I tried to move my body, but my legs felt inert. An intense, almost pulsating pain radiated from my back and shoulders, reminding me of the impact. Yet the true weight was in my chest. I closed my eyes, trying to process what had just happened. The memories came in fragmented waves. That thing, so much like my grandfather, was a grotesque distortion, a corrupted version of him. The days following the fall were chaotic. The impact had been more serious than I'd imagined. My left arm had taken most of the blow, and I had to be taken to the hospital that same day. There, the doctors confirmed a fracture and put my arm in a cast. Additionally, due to injuries to my head and shoulders, I was hospitalized for a week under observation. During that time, the memory of what had happened wouldn't leave me. But every time I tried to explain it to someone, words failed me. How could I say that something pushed me, and that it wasn't just an accident? I chose to keep it all to myself, sharing the incident only with my father. After being discharged, he insisted I stay at his house for a few days. I didn't resist because the thought of returning to my home felt unbearable. One evening, as we dined in a heavy silence, he finally broke the ice. "Sweetie, we need to face this. We can't keep going like this." He spoke firmly. "You might not believe in these things, but I think it would be good to see a healer." I knew he was right. I couldn't ignore what was happening anymore. I agreed, albeit reluctantly. The healer received us with a calm demeanor, speaking in a steady tone as if he already knew what he was dealing with. "Your daughter is carrying something with her, but it's not hers. She's just a channel. Something is attached to her, but its origin is in the house. The energy there is heavy, oppressive. It's clear they want her to leave that place. His words struck me like a punch. Are they using my grandfather? I murmured, barely able to speak. The healer nodded. Yes and no. What you saw wasn't his spirit. It was a distortion, a grotesque form created to scare you. My mind immediately went to Manuela. Suddenly everything made sense. Her resentment over losing the house, her anger when she found out the inheritance would be mine. It seemed like something she would do, use any means to try to reclaim what she wanted. A wave of indignation washed over me. Tears burned in my eyes, not from fear but from anger. The idea that my cousin could manipulate something as sacred as my grandfather's memory to harm me was unbearable. The healer lit a candle in the center of the room while preparing the ritual. He sprinkled holy water in the corners, murmuring prayers with confidence and conviction. Let's start by cleansing the environment, he explained as he continued his work. Then I need to strengthen your energy because you are the target. The house is being used as a tool to manipulate you. But if we break this connection, they won't have access to you anymore. Following his advice, I decided to leave the house for a month. It was a difficult but necessary decision. The healer explained that the ritual would require time and concentration, and my presence in the location could compromise the process. My father insisted I stay with him during this period. Reluctantly, I agreed. I knew I needed this break, this distance to regain my strength. During that month, the healer worked on the house multiple times and kept us updated on the progress. He said that, little by little, the environment was rebalancing. According to him, the negative energy still lingered but wasn't invincible. Those words gave me momentary relief, but I couldn't shake certain thoughts. Manuela. Her name and face continued to occupy my mind like a slow poison I couldn't neutralize. Finally, the day came to return to the house. A mix of anxiety and relief filled me as I crossed the front door. The change was immediately noticeable. The suffocating sensation, the invisible weight that seemed to press on my chest was gone. The air now felt light, as if the house had finally caught its breath after years of being trapped. I walked through the rooms cautiously, feeling every corner, and the difference was clear. There was a tranquility that once seemed impossible. Even so, the nightmares didn't vanish immediately. In the first few weeks, I still woke up in the middle of the night, sweaty and terrified, reliving confused images. My grandfather, the fall, the threatening whisper. In some dreams, I found myself trapped inside the house, the walls closing in around me while a mocking voice called my name. But as time passed, those nightmares became less frequent, and my routine began to normalize. Each peaceful night restored a bit of the control I thought I had lost forever. My father started visiting me regularly, always concerned about my recovery. One afternoon, as we assembled a new chair in the living room, he broke the silence with a question he seemed to have been holding back for a long time. Sweetie, sooner or later someone in the family will notice what happened. Don't you think we should tell them? At least, so they know. His words hung in the air and I paused what I was doing to look at him. No, Dad. I don't want anyone to know. Especially not the family. My tone was firm but laden with the mix of feelings I'd been holding back for weeks. I don't want to give anyone more reasons to hate Manuela. Everyone already knows how she is. We don't need to use this against her. That woman is already rotten inside and out. I don't want to fuel this cycle of hatred anymore. He sighed deeply, setting aside the chair leg he was holding. You're right, he admitted reluctantly. But it's hard to stay quiet after everything she's done to you. After everything that almost happened. That doesn't matter anymore, Dad. The house is at peace now, and that's what really matters. What Manuela thinks or wants has no power here anymore. He didn't reply immediately, just went back to working on the chair, fitting the pieces together slowly and carefully. I knew he still carried some unease, but I also knew he would respect my decision. In the end, life eventually made Manuela pay for everything she tried to do to me. Fortunately, I had the chance to witness that moment. But that, as they say, is a story for another day. Before we move on to the next story, if you're new here, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell to get the latest stories. Your presence means a lot, and your support is essential. All right, let's keep going. The deviations from reality are a fascinating subject. Often we believe certain situations happen due to distractions, carelessness, or a series of other factors that we can explain. But what about when something happens, and no matter how much we analyze all these factors, we simply cannot find an explanation? That's when we step into unknown territory, something our minds still cannot comprehend. We call this a glitch in reality. Want to know more? Let's explore together. Good evening, Dom. My name is Barbara. While studying accounting at university, I balanced my studies with a part-time job to cover expenses. I ended up staying in that job for 2 years longer than I had planned because I loved the environment and formed strong bonds of friendship with my colleagues. 6 months after I started, something unusual happened. One day, an unbearable stomachache prevented me from going to work. The diagnosis was appendicitis. Anyone who has been through it knows. It's impossible to think about anything else. All I could do was let my boss know about my absence. Although he wasn't very close to the employees, he was understanding and reassured me. That detail stayed in my memory for a reason you'll soon understand. On the same day I went to the doctor, was admitted to the hospital, and that very afternoon, I underwent surgery to remove my appendix. The process was quick, the surgery went well, and my recovery was smooth since there were no serious complications. While I was in the hospital and already feeling better, I decided to check my phone and saw a message from my best friend at work. She asked directly if I was mad at them. The question puzzled me. Could she be upset for only finding out about my situation later? I replied, asking why she thought that. About 10 minutes later, my friend explained that day she and another co-worker had seen me at work. Both greeted me, but I simply walked past them and went straight to my desk without responding. I worked in another, more isolated department, but the two insisted, asking from a distance if I was okay. At that moment, they said I got up from my chair, looked at them with an irritated expression, and then sat back down. That's why they thought I was upset. When I read this, I thought it was a joke. After all, another co-worker had also sent a similar message. Maybe the boss had told them I wouldn't be in, and they were trying to play a prank. However, when I explained that I was in the hospital and sent a photo from the hospital bed, my friend became visibly shaken. She replied with a voice message, clearly frightened, because both she and the other co-worker swore they had seen me at work, not realizing that at that exact moment I was hospitalized. Later, when I returned to work and shared the story with the receptionist, a woman who was always very kind and attentive, I found out that this kind of situation had happened before on that floor. The receptionist told me that a few years earlier, something similar had involved another employee. On that occasion, she said she had greeted the co-worker, but received only a serious look in response, which left her puzzled. However, later that same day, the department supervisor called to say that the employee wouldn't be coming to work because she had spent the morning at her child's school. I was left without answers. Could it have been a glitch in reality? A double? A phenomenon where a person appears or is perceived in two places at the same time, as if an alternative version or projection of them had taken their place somewhere else? I wonder if on some occasions we might confuse our perceptions or believe something happened due to mere oversight. However, in that case, it wasn't just one person who claimed to have seen me on the day I was absent. Additionally, there was also the receptionist's account of a similar event years earlier. Could there be something special or strange about that building? I'm Victoria Fernandez, originally from Jalisco, Mexico, and I want to share something I experienced at the age of 27. Upon hearing an old story from my region, I was reminded of a remarkable experience in my life. At the time, I lived alone in Mezcala, a small community near Lake Chapala. I moved there because my aunt decided to live in my house in Ocotlan and asked me to take care of her home in Mezcala. For a few months, everything was peaceful. until one night brought an experience that deeply marked me, and to this day I don't know if it was just a dream. What happened goes beyond what I experienced while asleep. I dreamt I was at the Temple of the Assumption, located in Mezcala's main square. In the dream, I was helping a priest, different from the one who actually served there, organize Sunday activities for children. However, I needed to return home to receive visitors, but I didn't have a watch or phone to check the time. That's when I saw a boy with a toy watch on his wrist, which curiously displayed the time. I bent down and asked him what time it was. The boy stared at me with a disturbing expression. His face began to distort in an impossible way, overtaken by something that looked like anger. He said something, but his words sounded muffled, as if coming from underwater. Despite being frightened, I insisted on asking the question. That's when he grabbed my arm tightly, squeezing it, and spoke with a deep voice filled with curses. "Pay attention when I'm talking to you." I woke up startled, drenched in sweat, but relieved to realize it was just a dream. To calm myself, I went to the bathroom and then to the kitchen, but I began to feel a burning sensation in my arm, around the elbow, as if it had been scalded by hot oil. When I looked in the mirror, I saw a red mark in the shape of a small hand, as if someone had gripped my skin. And I was stunned, recalling what the boy had done in the dream. The mark seemed real, but I couldn't understand how that was possible. Frightened, I spent the rest of the night wide awake, watching movies. The next morning, while on the phone with my aunt discussing financial matters, I noticed the mark was still there. It no longer hurt as much, but it was strange that it remained so vivid, as if it had just appeared. When I told my aunt about the dream, she made an intriguing confession. She too had experienced strange dreams involving the same church. On 3 occasions, she dreamt that she was helping wash pots for an event, and the sound of the pots clanging in the dream always woke her up. Upon getting up, she would find all the pots stacked in the kitchen, just as in her dreams. My aunt mentioned that whenever she dreamt about that church, a seemingly normal place, something strange would happen in real life. After that incident, I never dreamt of that church again, and the mark disappeared the following day. I've heard people say you shouldn't ask for the time in dreams, because it's said that you can never see a functioning clock while dreaming. What about you? Have you ever seen the time in a dream? Have you ever experienced anything like this? If you're enjoying the stories, don't forget to leave a like. It really makes a difference. Okay, let's continue. I was in the United States in 2010 with my partner, living through an intriguing episode that to this day we can't understand. My name is Paolo, and at that time we lived in San Bernardino. We were enjoying our vacation exploring various northern counties, including a visit to Lake Isabella. After a few nights and stops along the way, we took the California State Highway to continue our journey. It was already night when, while driving, I saw the car suddenly shut off in the middle of the road. Despite the scare, I managed to keep control and brake, as the steering wheel didn't lock. It was a Monday just past midnight. The road was completely deserted. Without cell phone signal and with the car stalled, we didn't know what to do. While I illuminated the engine with a flashlight trying to figure out the problem, my partner walked back and forth, trying to get a signal on her phone. We spent about half an hour like this, checking our phones from time to time, until finally another vehicle appeared. I signaled, and the driver, an older woman, stopped to help us. I explained to her that the car had simply stopped, and she suggested it might be a battery issue. I found that unlikely, but I agreed to try a jump start anyway. The woman repositioned her car, connected the cables, and suggested we wait a few minutes. In the meantime, we talked. She asked where we were from and where we were heading. I told her about our trip, and she calmly remarked that dawn was approaching and the road would soon become busier. Even though there were still hours before sunrise, she seemed very at ease. After about 20 minutes, I tried starting the car again. This time it worked perfectly, as if nothing had happened. I thanked her profusely and offered some money for her help, but she refused. She only asked us to be careful on the road and reminded us that dawn would soon bring more safety. Back in the car, Just about to resume our journey, my partner grabbed my arm, startled. She showed me her phone. It was 5:30 in the morning. In disbelief, I checked my own device. The time was the same, 5:36. We were absolutely certain that everything had started around midnight, and that the time until the woman arrived hadn't been more than half an hour. How could we have lost so many hours? As we continued our journey, the sky began to lighten, and it left us deeply unsettled. I had never been afraid to see the sunrise, but that day, the light brought more questions than relief. Where had we been all that time? We had been together the entire time. How could we explain that void in the clock? Many people believe that time slips can occur, especially on train or subway rides. Others suggest abductions when there are inexplicable lapses of hours. For me and my partner, it felt like a glitch in the very fabric of reality. And you, do you believe time can slip through our fingers like that? Good evening, Dom. First of all, I want to express my gratitude for this opportunity to share an event that deeply impacted my family and remains shrouded in mystery to this day. My name is Rita Ramirez, and this story happened to my cousin Gustavo more than a decade ago. It may sound like a soap opera plot, but what we experienced was as tangible as it was disturbing. Gustavo was always known for his seriousness, dedication to work, kindness, and strong principles. He married young to Pietra, a childhood friend. Together, they built what many considered a model family. But few knew that before his marriage, Gustavo had a brief and discreet relationship with our cousin Selena. Selena was known for her striking beauty, but also for her intense and controlling temperament. When they were teenagers, she and Gustavo had a fleeting romance that he never took seriously. For Gustavo, it was merely an exploratory phase. For Selena, however, it turned into an obsession. Although she never expressed it explicitly, we knew she had never gotten over it. This was a secret kept within the family. After Gustavo's wedding, Selena disappeared from family gatherings for a while. We thought she had moved on, but we were mistaken. Things began to change when Pietra started noticing strange behaviors in Gustavo. At first, they were subtle signs. He arrived home later, seemed distracted, and was easily irritated. Then, the changes became more severe. He began avoiding Pietra's company and started talking about strange dreams. Gustavo described visions of a beautiful woman riding a camel who called him by name and promised to grant him everything he ever wanted. Initially, he dismissed these dreams as random, but over time, they became more intense and frequent. Unsure how to handle it, Pietra reached out to me for guidance. When I visited them, I noticed that Gustavo was in an alarming state. He looked exhausted, as if he hadn't slept for days. His face showed deep, dark circles, and his expression was that of someone lost and confused. When I asked him what was happening, he only said he felt a force pulling him to a place he didn't want to go. It was during this time that Selena returned to the family circle. She started attending family events again, always well-dressed and displaying a calculated smile. However, what caught my attention most was the way she looked at Gustavo. It wasn't just a casual glance, but something penetrating, almost as if she were analyzing him. Pietra noticed it too and became visibly uncomfortable. During a family lunch, Selena approached Gustavo and started a private conversation. Pietra tried to hide her concern, but later she confided in me that she felt a sinking feeling in her chest seeing them together. Shortly afterward, Gustavo became even more distant, claiming an increased workload as an excuse. Pietra began to suspect he might be having an affair, though she had no concrete proof. One night, while organizing Gustavo's clothes, Pietra found something that left her paralyzed. A small red cloth bag, hand-sewn. Inside, there were dried petals, strands of hair, and what appeared to be coagulated blood. Shocked, Pietra called me immediately, and I went to her house to see the object. We both knew this wasn't normal. We decided to take the bag to a woman in the region known for her skills as a healer. When the healer opened the bag, her expression changed. Pale, she explained that it was a binding spell. According to her, it was a ritual meant to emotionally and physically bind someone. The embroidered symbol on the bag, she said, represented a female entity associated with love, desires, and control. However, she warned that this entity always demanded a high price from those who invoked it. The chilling detail was that her description matched Gustavo's dream accounts, a striking woman riding a camel, a symbol of strength and dominance. The healer warned us that this entity was dangerous because it fed on the dark desires of those who sought its help. Pietra, still skeptical, decided to confront Gustavo. Under pressure, he admitted that Selina had been secretly contacting him. She sent messages, made calls, and invited him to meet her. At first, he resisted but confessed he felt an inexplicable attraction to her. Worse, even while trying to avoid her, the dreams about Selina and that mysterious figure continued. From that point, things spiraled out of control. Gustavo started suffering anxiety attacks and claimed he constantly felt watched. Pietra, desperate, took him back to the healer, who performed a spiritual cleansing. However, she was clear, the spell would not be easily broken as it was tied to a malevolent entity. The tension escalated when Selina began acting more overtly. In a moment of courage, Pietra confronted Selina, and to our surprise, she didn't deny anything. Selina openly confessed she had made a pact because she had always loved Gustavo and couldn't bear to see him with another woman. She also revealed that she sought a sorcerer for help and had no regrets, believing they were destined to be together. Pietra tried to take legal action, but without concrete evidence, there was no way to file a complaint. When she sought help from Selina's mother, she received only indifference. Meanwhile, Gustavo continued to deteriorate. He quit his job and started showing constant paranoia. He said the woman on the camel repeatedly appeared in his dreams, threatening to destroy him if he tried to distance himself from Selina. Despite all our efforts to help, it seemed that any attempt to break the binding spell only strengthened the entity. Gustavo began to speak incoherently, lose weight drastically, and turn to alcohol to ease his despair. Pietra didn't give up, but the weight of the situation was evident. Even I, trying to support her, couldn't hide my fear that the outcome would be tragic. In the end, Gustavo made the worst decision. He left the house he shared with Pietra and moved in with Selena. Pietra was devastated but could do nothing to stop him. Gustavo seemed completely possessed, as if he were trapped by something invisible. Despite all our attempts to bring him back to reason, he reacted angrily or ignored any effort to communicate. Even though he was still married, he distanced himself more and more from Pietra, dedicating himself entirely to Selena regardless of the consequences. Over time, we discovered that Gustavo and Selena's relationship had taken an even darker and more disturbing turn. Though they initially appeared to have a superficial happiness, things soon began to unravel. Gustavo suffered from terrible nightmares, waking up screaming in the middle of the night. He said he saw the camel-riding woman everywhere in the house. His physical and mental health deteriorated at an alarming rate. Selena also seemed different, increasingly restless, as if tormented by something invisible. Unable to work, Gustavo became entirely dependent on Selena. However, his obsession with her, bordering on pathological, wasn't enough to alleviate the dark presence that enveloped them. The atmosphere in their home became unbearable, with frequent and sometimes violent arguments. Selena tried to maintain control, but it was evident that everything was slipping from her grasp. Neighbors began to notice. They reported hearing screams and loud noises coming from the house, while Selena avoided being seen and Gustavo almost never left. It became clear that the entity Selena had summoned had turned against them both. Pietra never stopped trying to help, but Gustavo rejected all her efforts to reconnect. He insisted that she was no longer part of his life and that only Selena understood him. It was hard to accept that someone like Gustavo, once so stable and grounded, had become a shadow of himself. Then the situation grew even more desperate. We were informed that Gustavo started seeing shadows. A neighbor said that one night he ran outside barefoot, dressed only in his sleepwear, screaming that the camel woman was outside watching him. Selena chased after him, trying to calm him down, but he refused to go back inside. Sitting on the sidewalk, he trembled and cried, repeating over and over that she was coming to take him. The neighbors called the police, but by the time they arrived, the door was locked. and Gustavo had already gone back inside, refusing to let anyone in. Desperate, Selena began seeking help from other sorcerers. Witnesses said she frequented dark markets, buying amulets and other protective objects, but the entity already seemed deeply rooted in their lives. At night, the sound of knocking could be heard on the walls, and neighbors reported seeing shadows moving behind the curtains. At one point, Pietra gathered the courage to visit Selena's house. Although she knew Gustavo would likely reject her, she needed to see him to confirm he was alive, and at least try to help him. When Selena opened the door, Pietra barely recognized her. Her face was pale, marked by exhaustion, her clothes dirty and disheveled. Without saying a word, Selena allowed Pietra to enter. Inside, Pietra found Gustavo sitting on the floor, surrounded by lit candles. His eyes were vacant as he murmured incoherent prayers. Selena, crying, knelt beside him, begging him to respond. It was then that Pietra noticed something strange. The walls were covered in engraved symbols, some marked with what appeared to be blood. When Pietra questioned Selena, she finally admitted she had tried to undo the spell. However, the sorcerer who had helped her summon the entity explained that it wouldn't be simple. Once called, the entity would demand a price. Through tears, Selena revealed that the entity had been threatening her in dreams, warning that if she didn't offer something as a sacrifice, Gustavo would be taken forever. Pietra wanted to take Gustavo away immediately, but he refused. He seemed terrified, convinced that leaving the house would put his life at risk. With no other options, Pietra sought a priest to bless the place. However, upon arrival, the priest refused to enter, stating that the force present in the house was beyond what he could face alone. Meanwhile, Selena sank further into despair. She spent almost all her time locked in her room, and when she dared to come out, could barely support her own weight. The house was overtaken by a strange odor, reminiscent of decaying flowers. Plants withered quickly, and the lights flickered for no apparent reason, even on calm nights. Then one night, chaos reached its peak. Frantic neighbors called Pietra, saying Selena had run into the street, screaming that she was inside the house. Pietra rushed there as fast as she could, but what she found was terrifying. Selena was covered in scratches, her face filled with utter desperation. Gustavo, on the other hand, was lying on the floor, unconscious. Gustavo was taken to the hospital, where doctors diagnosed him with severe dehydration and malnutrition. He spent days under observation, and when he regained consciousness, he had only fragmented memories. He recounted that in his mind, he had been trapped in a dark place where the camel woman spoke to him in low, threatening tones. Selena, on the other hand, was admitted to a psychiatric hospital. Her mental state had deteriorated so severely that she no longer recognized anyone. She constantly claimed that something was hunting her and that she would never escape. After these events, Pietra did everything she could to help Gustavo rebuild his life, but he was never the same. Their marriage ended in divorce, and Gustavo is now cared for by his family. Although he has regained some stability, he still carries the burden of what he went through. Selena remained trapped in her own madness. Today, she must be constantly sedated because, without medication, she experiences intense episodes of panic and anxiety. The house they lived in was abandoned shortly afterward. The new residents who dared to live there didn't stay long. They spoke of voices echoing at night and shadows appearing in mirrors. Over the years, the story of the camel woman became an urban legend in the neighborhood. But for us, it was a terrible and unforgettable reality. Pietra and I still meet occasionally to talk about everything that happened. We try to find logical explanations, but we've never reached a conclusion. The only certainty we have is that tampering with unknown forces can bring devastating consequences, leaving scars that never fade. My name is Lucio Toledo. I was born in Nuevo León, Mexico, and I want to share an experience I've never been able to forget. For several years, I worked at a tattoo studio in a plaza on Cuauhtemoc Avenue in the municipality of Santa Catarina. I always finished late, usually around 11 at night. On those nights, I would often head home with a colleague in his car. One of those nights, as we were driving toward Diaz Ordaz Boulevard, we reached the train tracks that crossed the road. That's when something happened that left a deep impression on me. We saw a train approaching, but something was off. It was completely dark with no lights on. My friend, intrigued, remarked, "Look at that, it's going to pass. Honk to warn them." The train seemed to be coming fast, wrapped in darkness, and to make things worse, we saw another car moving slowly toward the tracks. Sensing immediate danger, I started flashing the headlights and honking repeatedly, trying to warn the driver. My colleague, more impulsive, got out of the car and began shouting at the other vehicle to warn them. Despite all our efforts, the car seemed unresponsive, as if trapped in its own world, and the train showed no sign of slowing down either. Overcome by fear, I covered my face with my hands, unable to face what seemed inevitable. When I finally summoned the courage to look again, I was confronted with something impossible to explain. Both the train and the car had simply vanished. Confused, I asked my friend, "Where's the train and the car?" He walked over to the tracks, looked around, and replied, even more bewildered, "Did you hear anything, the sound of the train?" It was only then that I noticed the most unsettling detail. There hadn't been any sound, not the noise of the locomotive, nor the car's engine. It was as if the train had been moving in complete silence, wrapped in an eerie darkness. A profound fear overtook us. We returned to the car, unable to understand what we had just witnessed. Later, we remembered a terrible accident that had occurred at that very spot back in December 2000. A city bus had tried to cross the tracks before the train arrived, but didn't make it. 18 people died in that disaster, known as the Santa Catarina train crash. A few years later, we heard about another similar accident in the same location, but few details were ever released. To this day, I don't know if the car we saw that night was somehow connected to those tragic events, but I can't dismiss the possibility. Perhaps what we witnessed was a replay of something that had already happened, as if time was showing us a reflection of another moment. Maybe it was something that no longer belongs to this world. That's the only explanation I can imagine. This experience left a deep mark on me, and no matter how much time passes, I can't forget it. I prefer to remain anonymous because I'm afraid people might think I'm crazy or on something. My story is short, but it left a deep mark on me. Since that day, I've been living in fear. One night I was at home lying in bed watching videos on my phone. I wasn't sleepy, so I decided to go to the bathroom and drink some water to avoid having to get up in the middle of the night. When I returned, I left the bathroom door slightly closed, not fully open. That's when, out of the corner of my eye, I saw something strange in the mirror. It looked like the reflection wasn't inverted. I got closer and saw clearly that my image in the mirror wasn't reversed. It was as if I was facing away. I could see myself from behind. I turned on the light and kept seeing my reflection like that. Instinctively, I turned around to check if there was anything behind me, but there was nothing. When I looked back at the mirror, I still saw myself from behind. At that moment, I don't know if it was because of the shock, but I started to feel really unwell. An overwhelming fatigue came over me, and I just wanted to lie down. Before turning off the light, I saw my reflection in the mirror again, but it was still turned away, moving. I went back to bed and, feeling so exhausted, fell asleep almost instantly. The next day, everything seemed normal. Even so, I was too scared to look at the mirror again. I didn't tell my parents because I was afraid they'd think I was on drugs, which wasn't true. Over time, that unease lingered. I started therapy because I developed a fear of looking at mirrors. In therapy, everything seemed fine. I also underwent some tests to rule out neurological issues or something similar, but nothing was found. To this day, I don't understand what happened that night, who was looking at whom. Before we get to the last story, if you're still here, let me know what time you're watching in the comments. I love seeing who sticks around until the end. Let's not stop now. On to the next. I live in Louisiana in the United States, and I want to share an experience that I still can't explain. When I was living with my husband in a small rented house, something absolutely unexplainable happened. Today, we have our own home, but this remarkable episode took place during that rental period, and I still don't know if it was a slip in reality or something beyond that. It all started when my husband lost the house keys. Without time to make copies, we agreed that since I was on vacation, I would stay home to ensure the door was locked after he left. For a week, I would walk him to the door, close it, and lock it immediately. One ordinary morning he left for work, and as usual I walked him to the door, said goodbye, and locked it with the keys. Shortly after, I went to take a quick shower. No more than 3 minutes had passed when suddenly I heard my husband yelling from outside the bathroom, "I'm heading out. Don't forget to lock the door after your shower." I froze, completely taken by surprise and confusion. What was he doing back home? And more importantly, how did he get in when I had locked the door and had the keys with me? Had he found the lost copies? Bewildered, I replied with irritation, "You scared me. How did you get in? Did you find the keys? Don't do that again." Calmly, he answered, "You opened the door for me yourself. I just came back because I forgot a memory card in the bedroom. When I arrived, I figured you were in the shower since the water was running." None of it made the slightest sense to me. I was absolutely certain I had locked the door and hadn't gone back to let anyone in. But he insisted, saying I had let him in with a look on my face that showed I wasn't in a good mood, and then went back to the bathroom. According to him, he even saw the keys left in the lock on the outside of the door, something I would never do. All of this happened in just a matter of minutes. Frightened and unsure how to react, I got out of the shower with my hair still wet and went straight to a friend's house. I couldn't stop thinking that something, or someone, had impersonated me. My husband tried to lighten the mood, suggesting that perhaps some unconscious part of me knew he needed to come in. But to me, that made no sense at all. Even now, living in another house, I carry the fear that something like this might happen again someday. Hey everyone, thanks for listening. Click the notification bell to stay updated on all future narrations. I post new videos here every day. I hope to see you in the next one. On the screen now, I'm leaving 2 other great videos I know you'll enjoy. See you there.